Daniel chapter 11 is, I've said it before, it's complicated, one of the most complicated chapters in the Bible. It's history. And unless you're a historian, of which I'm not really a historian in the sense of secular history, I'm not sure what I was doing during those classes, but I'm certain this probably wasn't covered in detail in high school or junior high. I was the kid who sat in the back, and when the projector was going, I would yank the extension cord to make it go like that. Subsequently made repeated trips to the office. True story. I should have paid more attention. So because of the length of this chapter, which I'm endeavoring to get through today, so it's a big chapter. I'm not going to read through it initially just because it's so long. So we're just going to take it a little bit at a time, and hopefully you'll be able to catch the broader theme of it, which I think is pretty simple. It's not really in a broad context. It's not much different from the other prophecies in Daniel. The other prophecies in Daniel were all about the rise and fall of the kingdoms of men, and the fact that God was in control. That's a pretty good summary of the rest of the book, as God reminds all those who would read this, and for all of history. So let's just read the first 4 verses. In the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him. And now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a 4th will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. And a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with great authority and do as he pleases. But as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out towards the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority which he wielded, for his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others besides him. So, verse 1 kind of goes with verse 10. This is the angelic being who's given to Daniel, the man of God. He's given him this prophetic word. And he is saying there in the opening verse, in some way I had an influence over Darius. This we see over and over again. God's at work in rulers, in the lives, in the hearts of rulers. I mean, that's really this thing that we've seen over and over and over and over again. These guys arise and they think they're the kings of the world, and yet God's at work. And so we're getting, again, this continued kind of behind-the-scenes view of something else going on during the first year of Darius' reign. Do you remember what happened during the first year of Darius' reign? This is when those jealous government officials tried to take Daniel out. They were jealous of Daniel as he was getting favor. They devised this plot, let's take him out. And so they whispered in Darius's ear, oh, hey, king, you're really something. You ought to pass a law that no one can pray except to you, because we recognize you as a god. And of course, Darius, being just a human who, like so many leaders, was lifted up in his own mind and in his own heart, he thought, oh, that's a good idea. And so Daniel was caught praying and subsequently cast into the lion's den. That's what was going on. But then in chapter 6, verse 22, it says, "My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, and they have not harmed me." Now, we don't know what angel that was, but here the angel is saying, I was active at that time. And what we saw after that, as God was moving in Daniel's life and using him in Babylon, he protected Darius from killing him. And it seemed to, as we wrapped up chapter 6, it seemed to have had a significant impact on this leader. He ended up giving a great declaration of faith and confidence in Daniel's God. Again, this is one of the overarching themes we see over and over and over again. God is at work. He's at work in all people, right? In every socio-economic group. Certainly, he's at work in the lives of the kings. And that's what all of this entire chapter, or this entire book is about. God is at work. Intervening, orchestrating, and also foretelling all the things that would go down in human history. Our God is sovereign. Now, what's laid out here in these verses is that there would be 3 more kings. After the existing one, which at the time that this prophecy was given, it was Cyrus. Then there would be Cambyses, Pseudo-Smyrnus, Darius the one, Histopes, Xerxes. Now, I'm not a historian. So a lot of these, it's like, oh, you've got to do the work. You've got to read up on these guys if you want to know anything about them. But what was written, what was given, rather, in the prophecy is what happened in history. Xerxes was probably the most powerful of the Persian kings, and it was him who went against Greece. As it says there in the end of chapter 2, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. And so he did this in 480 BC. There's a reference to a mighty king who will arise. They're all mighty, but it seems as though there's reference to each one of them and their particular might, their particular strength. But the one that's referenced in verse 3 is Alexander the Great. You may recall him from chapter 8 in the vision that Daniel was given there in chapter 8. He was the goat, which the common idea of goat kind of applies, because Alexander was great. He exceeded in many ways the amount of territory, and as we've seen over and over again, the speed at which they took land, they took kingdoms under Alexander. It was great. He was a great and powerful ruler. However, you look at verse 4 and it says, as soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up. Now again, if you're not a student of the Bible, if you've never gone through this before, especially you young people that are here, this is God speaking to Daniel through the agency of this angel in a vision. These are things that are going to happen in the future. That's what prophecy is, the foretelling of things that will happen in the future. And this is exactly what happened. Shortly after Alexander, in all of his conquering, he died at a relatively young age, just as it says here. As soon as he is arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out. So shortly after his conquering, that's exactly what happened. Again, he died at a relatively young age, and the kingdom was parceled out to 4 of his generals. This is history. So you've got the Bible, and it is though you can do this work. You can read what it says here, and then get your encyclopedia or whatever world history you want to look at, And you can line the two up. After Alexander died, Greece was parceled out to his 4 generals. Cassander, Lysimachus, some of these are difficult. Cassander ended up ruling Macedonia and Greece. Lysimachus ruled Thrace, Bithynia, and Asia Minor. Seleucus ruled Syria and the lands to the east, including Babylon. And then the Ptolemies ruled Egypt and Arabia. Now, beginning in verse 5, the prophecy gets complicated. It gets even more complicated. It concentrates on the battles of what's called the kings of the north and the kings of the south, which ends up being kind of the geography of Syria and Egypt. And it's just a battle that goes back and forth for years for power and for wealth. Okay, so I want to read a relatively large swath here, verses 5 through 20. It says, "Then the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His domain will be a great dominion indeed. After some years, they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the kings of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position or power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up along with those who brought her in, and the one who sired her, as well as he who supported her in those times. But one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. Also their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold he will take into captivity to Egypt, and he on his part will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. His sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to his very fortress." Verse 11, "The king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former." You kind of get the sense of the back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. "When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up and will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. For the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former. And after an interval of some years, he will press on with a great army and much equipment. Now in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. The violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege ramp, and capture a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land with destruction in his hand. He will set his face to come with the power of the whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. Then he will turn his face to the coastlands and capture many, but a commander will put a stop to his scorn. Against him, moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. So he will turn his face towards the fortresses of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Then in his place one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom, yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger nor in battle. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. You get the idea. There's a lot of repeated ideas. It's like, you come against me, okay, I'm going to come against you. You've got a big army, I'm going to get a bigger army. I mean, this is humanity. This is what we do. This is the course of history. This period of time, roughly 323 to 175 BC, it covers the time of 6 different dynasties in the south, which would be the Ptolemies, right? From Ptolemy 1 to Ptolemy 6. And then in the north, it covers 8 different leaders who were alternately called they either took the title of Seleucus or Antiochus. Now, of course, whenever we mention Antiochus, we think of Antiochus Epiphanes, but he wasn't the first. He was the 4th ruler to have that title. So that's what we see here. It's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And there are many details, and we could go through this. Again, you could get out the history books and align this. It aligns. Smarter guys than me have done the work. It aligns with history. God foretelling. And it's not like it's like, this thing happened and then this thing happened in a short amount of time. This is a long period of time where God just gives little vignettes and he says, well, this little thing happened here and this little thing happened here. The purpose of it is for God to say, I'm in control. I know what's going to happen. And I'm giving you, Daniel, I'm giving you insight. Not that Daniel would never live to see any of these things. It's only us. Later, we can look back and go, oh, here it is. Now, I just want to point out some of maybe the more dramatic things that occur here. When we look at verses 6 and 7, there is an alliance that's formed. Look at that passage again. They're going to form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out some kind of an alliance. Well, this is not common, but it's repeated through history, where through marriage, right, there would be some kind of a marriage alliance. That's exactly what happened. There was this attempt at alliance between Antiochus II and Ptolemy II, with a bigamous marriage of Berenice, the daughter of Ptolemy II, to Antiochus. But just as it says, Ptolemy ended up dying and the marriage dissolved. It didn't really work. Again, look at what it says. It says, she's not going to retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power. The strategy doesn't end up working. It happened. It happened just the way it says. And then Berenice's brother ascended to the throne in Egypt, just as it's described in verse 7. One of the descendants of her line, that woman who was engaged in this attempted, alliance, he would arise. One of the descendants of her line would arise. And so it was her brother, Ptolemy III, named Euergetes. And then he attacked the region of the north. He overcame them. There are a lot of details here. And I think, if we took the time to go through it, you would be bored. Again, you can read. You can study this, and you'll find that the events described line up with actual events that happened in history. A couple other things here. Look at verse 17. Verse 17 says, he will set his face to come with the power of the whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace. Again, there's some kind of an alliance, some kind of an agreement. It's going to be put into effect. And again, there's going to be, it says the daughter of women are going to be involved in this. This happened. Historically, this happened under Antiochus III. He gave his daughter, Cleopatra, not the Cleopatra that would later be, and that's one of the things. Let me just say that. That's one of the things that's so confusing about these things, is because you have people that are referenced by the same name. So there have been several Cleopatras, just as there have been several people known as Antiochus or Seleucus. So it gets kind of confusing. It's kind of like the popes, right? The popes, they take these names of some former pope rather than their own name, which I don't know why. But that's what happens in history, and it does make it a little bit confusing. So, but this happened exactly as it says. Antiochus III gave his daughter Cleopatra to Antiochus. He gave it to Ptolemy V of Egypt, in the hopes, again, that there would be some influence. But it says that his intention was to ruin it, to somehow gain control. But it says in verse 17, she will not take a stand for him or be on his side. And this is what happened. Cleopatra was married there to Ptolemy, and evidently she liked him, and she became loyal to him, not her father who gave her away. Oops, yeah, exactly. It didn't work. Again, these are intricate details of history foretold by God that played out. And so when we look at this thing, this is why people, they throw the book of Daniel out. Liberal scholars, so-called scholars, they throw it out because they say, oh, no one could do that. It's too accurate. No, it's God's word. It's proof, right, that God is in control of these things. And I don't know what these guys do with the fact that Jesus quoted from Daniel, right? That Jesus pointed to Daniel. See, that's the problem with liberal theology, is you end up having to throw out everything. No. It's one of the reasons why we study this book, is because it's so wonderful in that it gives evidence. It gives evidence to the power of God and the reliability of his word. Now, in verse 21, we begin to see the appearance of Antiochus IV, known as Epiphanes. This is the guy that we've seen over and over again. But verse 20 kind of tells us what set him up, in a sense. Look at it again. It says, in his place, one will arise. This isn't Antiochus, but this is the setup for Antiochus, the Epiphanes. In his place, one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom. Yet within a few days he will be shattered, though not in anger or in battle. So clearly that's not Antiochus. So the next king in line was Seleucus III, the oldest son of Antiochus III. He oppressed the Holy Land. This is when you read the jewel of the kingdom. That's the Holy Land. That's Israel. That's Jerusalem. And he was beginning to get pressure. Rome was rising at this time. And he was beginning to get pressure to pay tribute to Rome, Rome was the next, right? Rome was the next world ruling empire, and they were beginning to arise, and they were beginning to exert power. And they were doing what kings and kingdoms do. They want to tax you, right? That's the first thing they want, is money, so that they can fund their war machine to conquer more land. So they were beginning to exert pressure, and so this Seleucus, he sent a chief minister to Jerusalem to plunder the riches of the temple. All the riches of Israel were kind of there. And so he sent an emissary. He says, go get some funds. I mean, it probably wasn't an individual. It was probably a contingent, an army. But he was stopped by a vision, according to historians. He was stopped by a vision, and he returned. He's like, yeah, I can't go there. I can't do that. God, once again, intervening in human history and showing that he was in control. Subsequently, this guy, this ruler, Seleucus III, he was executed. Mysteriously, someone killed him. Historians believe that it was this emissary that he had sent to Jerusalem. A little bit of, mystery there. You're going to go against my people? It's not going to work. And so that guy was assassinated. Now, all that gives rise to this next guy, who is really one of our greater focuses, Antiochus Epiphanes, Antiochus IV Epiphanes. So, again, let's read. We're doing really good on time. Let's go ahead and read all the way from verse 21 through 35. Hopefully you guys are sticking with me. He's an interesting character, but one for which we have already, in previous chapters, read quite a bit. In his place, so in place of this guy Seleucus, in his place, a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. But he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. The overflowing forces will be flooded away before him and shattered. Also the prince of the covenant. After an alliance is made with him, he will practice deception. And he will go up and gain power with the small force of people. In a time of tranquility, he will enter the richest part of the realm and will accomplish what his fathers never did, nor his ancestors. He will distribute plunder, booty, and possessions among them. He will devise his schemes against strongholds, but only for a time. He will stir up his strength and courage against the king of the south with a large army, so that the king of the south will mobilize an exceedingly large and mighty army for war. But he will not stand, for schemes will be devised against him. Those who eat his choice food will destroy him, and his army will overflow, but many will fall down slain. Verse 27, as for both kings, their hearts will be intent on evil, and they will speak lies to each other at the same table. But it will not succeed, for the end is still to come at the appointed time. Then he will return to his land with much plunder, but his heart will be set against the holy covenant, and he will take action and then return to his own land. At the appointed time, he will return and come into the south. But this last time, it will not turn out the way it did before. For ships of Kittim will come against him. Therefore, he will be disheartened, and he will return and become enraged at the holy covenant and take action. So he will come back and show regard for those who forsake the holy covenant. Forces from him will arise and desecrate the fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation. By smooth words, he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly towards the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength to take action. Those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many, yet they will fall by the sword and by flame, by captivity, by plunder for many days. Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. Some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time. It gets, for lack of a better term, it gets kind of exciting here. It's like, wow, okay. Probably mostly because we know this guy. We've seen this guy already. He's despicable. Vile. In that regard, he's worse than those who've come before him. This is the same guy that we saw in chapter 8, the little horn that comes up. He was not naturally the next in line. Mysteriously, those who were the next in line died. It says he's going to seize power by intrigue. You got a little bit of mystery here, the details of which are lost to history. We don't know all of them. We just know that mysteriously, his opponents politically just died. This happens. By intrigue. The word there is smooth or slippery. He's a snake. like his father, the devil. We see in verse 24 and 26, he grows in power. He's powerful militarily. He attacks specifically during times of peace. Ugh, that's just like the worst, isn't it? It's one thing when you see nations kind of build and go to war in that way, but attacking during a time of peace, during a time of tranquility, you get the idea of how power hungry he is. He goes against Egypt and prevails. Verses 27 and 28 describe his wickedness. As he's going against Egypt specifically, evidently they at some point are at a table. The whole idea there is there's some bargaining going on. There's some discussions, some political discussions. Peace talks, they call it. But neither one of these leaders are going to honor their agreements. And Egypt won't be enough for this guy. It says that his heart will be set against the holy covenant. That seems plain enough who he's talking about there. He's talking about the people of God. The people of God who are in a covenant relationship with God. His heart will be set against them. He will take action against them. Now, Antiochus Epiphanes, he's a type. And we've seen it over and over and over again throughout history. For some demonic-inspired reason, these megalomaniac guys, they hate Israel. They want to go against God's people over and over and over. It continues to this day. If you ever wonder about what's going on in the Middle East, it's all about Israel and the hatred of the Jews. There's no rational explanation for it. It's demonically inspired. And this man, of all men, of all world rulers, he's demonically inspired. As it says, he's vile, he's despicable. Verses 29 and 30 give us some more information. It says, ships of Kittim are going to intervene. Kittim is on Cyprus, and this is where the Roman navy was. They were in the process of conquering. And they would show up on the scene. Even as Antiochus was trying to plunder all the wealth of Egypt and everything else that he could plunder and take, the Romans wanted it as well. And they were challenging Antiochus's threat. You remember I told this story, months ago when we were in Hebrews as an example, a little bit differently, but as an example, there was this occasion where Antiochus was going against Egypt, and then the Romans came and they kind of said, hey, you need to go home. And this Roman leader, Popilius, he met with Antiochus. And it says he told him to go home. They didn't want to go to war with them quite yet. They were battling for the riches of Egypt. And he says, go home. And Antiochus replied and said, I'll consider it. And as the story goes, Popilius took his staff and drew a circle around Antiochus Epiphanes and said, go ahead and consider it. Make up your mind before you leave the circle. It was a great move. This is human history. This happened. And Antiochus, he knew he was outgunned. And so he went home. Now think about this for a second. That's humiliating. And for a guy, a vile man who's all about conquering, who's all about just like expanding his territory, this enraged him. And this kind of thing enrages someone who doesn't know the Lord, who's not governed by God. He's humiliated. And so what does he do? He goes crazy. That set up what was then to come. His persecution of the Jews, which is laid out in verses 30 through 35. Again, we go to history to read about this. You could read through it again. He's going to return, and he's going to become enraged, verse 30, at the Holy Covenant. They weren't the ones that came against him. It was Egypt, or it was Rome, over the battle of Egypt. But he's just crazy. And so he takes it out on the Jews. And so we read in 1 Maccabees chapter 1, this is apocryphal, it's not scripture, but it's reliable in the sense of a recording of history. I read this in a previous chapter, but it's worth going through again at this point. The king, Antiochus Epiphanes, sent letters by messengers to Jerusalem and to the cities of Judah, ordering them to follow customs foreign to their land, to prohibit burnt offerings, sacrifices, and libations in the sanctuary, to profane the Sabbaths and the feast days, to desecrate the sanctuary and the sacred ministers, to build pagan altars and temples and shrines, to sacrifice swine and unclean animals, to leave their sons uncircumcised and defile themselves with every kind of impurity and abomination, so that they might forget the law and change all its ordinances, and whoever refused to act according to the command of the king was put to death. Some 40,000 people were killed. Another 40,000 taken as slaves. This happened. It happened in history, and it just lays it out. It's like he comes to Jerusalem, and he encourages people, God's people, to abandon the pursuit of God and to follow all the pagan practices. And you can just kind of let your mind wander a bit to what that would be like. What that would be like if a conquering government came in and said, hey, these Christian morals that you have, you don't need those anymore. I got some ideas. You guys can do whatever you want. Sexually, you can do whatever you want. Drugs and alcohol, you can do whatever you want. What do you want to indulge in? You can indulge in it. In fact, I'm not only giving you permission, I'm encouraging you to abandon all sense of morality and allegiance to God. That's exactly what he did. And people fell. People fell for it. And then he did this, what's known as the Abomination of Desolation. Verse 31. He came into the sanctuary, the holy place, the temple of God, where the presence of God was manifest, where God was worshipped. And he set up an altar, he set up an image of Zeus. And they sacrificed pigs there and defiled it. That's what's referred to as the Abomination of Desolation. And Jesus talked about this in Mark chapter 13 and in Matthew chapter 24, as he's talking about the things that would happen at the end, he refers to this very thing that happened now. When Jesus is talking about it, he's talking about it past tense. Remember that thing that Antiochus Epiphanes did? He says that's going to happen in the future. Antiochus Epiphanes, he's only a type. He's only a shadow. Now look at verse 35 before we move on. It says, some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end. It's always true of persecution. It's always true of difficulty that there's a refining that goes on with God's people. The things that can be shaken will be shaken. The testing of our faith is like the winnowing of wheat, right? Where the wind carries away the chaff. The thing that is of no value is blown away. Or like the smelting of gold, where the ore is heated up and the gold is melted away, but that's the part that's saved. But it's the separating of that which is pure, that which is good, from that which is not. And that's what happened to God's people. There was a refining. There was a winnowing. Friends, I think that's what's going on today in the church. I think there's a winnowing going on, a refining going on, and it's going to continue. We need to hold on. We need to hold on to Jesus. Now, between verse 35 and verse 36, there seems to be a break. It's not entirely obvious, and many argue with this, but I want to just point out to you the language there at the end of verse 35. It says, it mentions that this refining is going to go on to the end time. But then there's this idea that there's something still to come at an appointed time. The next line begins with, then the king will do as he pleases. There is a king referenced, but most conservative scholars believe that there is a break in time, a significant break in time. We're talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, but then from verse 36 on, it doesn't line up with history. Like when the same historians who look at this and go, oh, okay, this happened and this happened and this happened in history, when you get to verse 36 and on, it hasn't happened. Things like it have happened, but not precisely. And so it seems as though from verse 36 and on, we're looking at something. Look at chapter 12, verse 1. As we get into chapter 12 next week, it says, at that time, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time of distress, it says, never occurred since there was a nation. That's not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. It's not talking about that time. When we get to chapter 12, he's saying at that time, that's going to be right before this great time of great trouble, like there's been no trouble ever before. When is that? That's the 70th week of Daniel's prophecy in chapter 9. That's the Great Tribulation. So we think, again, this is not just my thought, it's conservative scholarship, that there is a break in time, and now we're not talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, we're talking about the individual who Antiochus Epiphanes is simply a shadow of, or a type of. Let's read verses 36 through the end of the chapter. You guys didn't think we were going to get done. We're going to get done early. We'll see. The king, you guys are like doubtful on that, I'm sure. Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god. He will magnify himself above them all. But instead, he will honor a God of fortresses, a God whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. Verse 39, he will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god. He will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over the many, and will parcel out land for a price. At the end time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots, with horsemen, with many ships. And he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall, but these will be rescued out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end and no one will help him. When you read all these details and you look at the rest of the life of Antiochus Epiphanes, it doesn't line up. Nor does it line up with any other world ruler. And there's a reference over and over to the end, to the end, to the end. We see that he enters into the Holy Land, which he's already entered in. So this is clearly someone else. Someone in the future. This is the Antichrist. It's the prince who is to come, according to Daniel 9:26. This is the beast of Revelation. The one who will arise. We don't know who it is. This hasn't happened yet. And so many of these things, they're a little bit obscure, yet we know right here. We know right here what he's like. First of all, like all the other world leaders that have come before, he's going to do whatever he wants. He's going to do as he pleases. And this is the joke, really, isn't it? Of all of these guys. They think, oh, I'm doing whatever I want. Really? God mocks them. They have no idea that they're pawns in the plan of the ages that he is actually working out. He will do as he pleases. He will seem to do as he pleases. It says he will exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Now, with the Abomination of Desolation that Antiochus Epiphanes did, that was terrible. But he never, at least according to the historians, he never did what the Antichrist will do. Where he will make himself out to be God. This guy is beyond. It says he's going to speak monstrous things against the God of gods. That's our God. Like all those who have come before, he will speak out against God. He'll be bold in his words. I hate this. He's going to prosper. Don't you hate that when the wicked prosper? David struggled with this in his lifetime, and he wrote about it over and over again. It's just so difficult to see the wicked prosper. And so they do in the world. He will seem to prosper. And all of this is going to happen, it says, until indignation is finished. Until all the trouble of humanity basically is finished. As we read in chapter 9 with the beginning of the 70-week prophecy, all of this is declared, it's going to happen, and in a sense that last week is going to finish up. It's going to finish up all of God's dealing with the nation. He will be irreligious, you might say. He's not going to have any regard for, and people are divided about this one, the God of his fathers. What does that mean? Does that mean he's a Jew? Could mean he's a Muslim. Could mean he's from, from some religious background. But ultimately, God is the God of everyone. The whole idea is he's against religious thought. He's against the morality of religion. Certainly against our God. Although what we see in Revelation 13 is he is propped up and supported by a false prophet. This is why we pay attention to Christian leaders. Every Christian leader needs to be scrutinized, especially those ones who are gaining prominence worldwide. Even the popes, we watch them. Because at the end, this beast will be supported. And the religious support will say, worship this guy. It says he will show no regard for the desire of women. Again, this is, you could read this a couple of different ways. Some believe that the Antichrist will be homosexual. It could be that he's just a misogynistic brute. That he just treats women very, very poorly. So many world leaders fall into that category. There's something else that's interesting, that can be understood only from a Jewish context. And that is this phrase that he will show no regard for the desire of women. Do you know what the desire of Jewish women is? The principal, the chief, the greatest desire of all Jewish women is that they would give birth to the Messiah. Throughout all of history, as God promised a Savior to the world. Every little girl, they didn't hope they would grow up and be Cinderella. They hoped they would grow up and give birth to the Messiah. He's going to be against the Messiah. That's the point of it. I like that interpretation of this. Regardless, I think all the things are going to be kind of true of this guy. But certainly his heart is set against Christ. That's why we call him Antichrist. He will honor the God of fortresses. Fortress here is understood to be synonymous with the protection of the war machine. He will trust in weapons of war. It's interesting that God warns his people over and over and over through the ages. Don't trust in the weapons of war. In Isaiah 31, the prophet says this, "Woe to those who go down to Egypt for help and rely on horses and trust in chariots, because they are many, and in horsemen because they are very strong, but they do not look to the Holy One of Israel, nor seek the Lord." God told his people over and over again, don't put your trust in those things. Don't put your trust in the weapons of war. Now, I understand politically, that phrase, I think it was Ronald Reagan gave us, peace through strength. I get it. In a political sense, I totally understand that as a foreign policy position. But you and I, the challenge that we have is we have to guard against putting our hope in a military solution to evil. Even while we may support military action, we have to be careful that we're not all in on that as some solution, because it's never going to be. Paul tells us in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, this great reminder, though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We appeal to God, who's greater than all these things. Now, I just want to say, before we wrap up here, think about this. Here is the resume of the Antichrist. This is what he looks like. He does as he pleases. When you do as you please, when that's the attitude of your heart, you're Antichrist. When you speak monstrous things against God or against biblical teaching or the morality of God, which I'm assuming none of you do, but sometimes we can align ourselves, right? We wouldn't speak against God, we'll just act differently. You're Antichrist. We should be careful of these things. We should not envy the prosperity of the wicked. If there's any sense of the casting off of religious observance, we should be really careful about that. That's Antichrist. Certainly in regard to the way we think about women as men, the way we think about women, the way we think about the difference in the sexes, we should be careful about that. The reliance upon political solutions or military solutions to all the problems of the world, we have to be careful of these things. Now, the battles described in verses 40 and 45, they're yet future. As we look at the language of horsemen and chariots, they're simply symbols of war. Right? God uses the same symbols over and over again. In the last days, the army will probably not be chariots. Right? You get that, right? It's not chariots. They're not going to be riding horses. I mean, they could. But there's great battles that are going to be going on, significant wars, a time of unprecedented war, as the Antichrist goes crazy to conquer the world. In Revelation 9:16, it says the number of the armies of the horsemen was 200 million. I heard the number of them, John says. An army of 200 million. Now people look at that and go, oh, that's just figurative for a lot of people. This became really interesting in the 70s when it became known that China had boasted in having 200 million soldiers. I wonder how many they have now. And it's not really about China. It's about an incredible invasion from the north. At the last days, there will be an army that is so massive. It's going to be terrible. Yet the final line here we see in verse 45, this is of this figure, the Antichrist. He will come to his end and no one will help him. I want to play the little violin. He's going to rise. He's going to have power. He's going to have authority. He's going to seem to be unstoppable. And as he kind of finalizes his work, he's going to be done away with like that. As it says in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 8, it says that lawless one, here Paul's writing about this same figure, he's going to be revealed, whom the Lord will slay with the breath of his mouth and bring to an end by the appearance of his coming. That's power. All the kings of the world think they have power. Oh, they're going to do whatever they want. They're going to conquer and become rich and do whatever they want. Jesus is going to show up. And from what comes from his mouth, it's not a literal, I don't think he's going to hit him with some literal sword that comes from his mouth. It's his word. It's the power of God's word. This man, this conqueror, this one that throughout the ages, people have been, oh, the Antichrist, who is he? He's going to be gone in an instant. And it'll be over. The kingdoms of man, the world rulers, they come and go, they rise and fall. Each desire to act independently of God, and each ultimately will fail. And our God will stand. Amen? As we close, Hannah, you can go ahead and come up. As we close, I want to read a passage from Isaiah 46 that I think is just a good reminder to all of us in summary. God says in Isaiah 46, chapter 46, verses 8 through 13, remember this and be assured. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. That's you and me. Remember the former things long past. For I am God and there is no other God. There is no other. I am God and there is no one like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established and I will accomplish my good pleasure, calling a bird of prey from the east, the man of my purpose from a far country. Truly I have spoken. Truly I will bring it to pass. I have planned it. Surely I will do it. Listen to me, you stubborn-minded, who are far from righteousness. I will bring near my righteousness. It is not far off, and my salvation will not delay. I will grant salvation in Zion, and for my glory for Israel. Jesus is his glory. God's purpose will not fail. His word will not fail. All of this will come to pass. And yet for us who are trusting in Jesus, our lives are secure. You should never be afraid of the things that are coming. You should never be afraid of the Antichrist. You should never be afraid of the tribulation. You should be motivated by these things. These things are coming to pass. And it seems as though they're coming to pass soon, quickly. This should motivate us in gratitude towards God, but in evangelism to our neighbors. People need to know about Jesus. Father, thank you for your word. God, I thank you that you have laid it out for us. For all of history and for all of humanity, you are God. You are King. We believe it. We declare it. We thank you for your word. God, thank you that our future is secure in you. We worship you this morning. We give you thanks and praise in Jesus' name.